We've built the conference around three themes. Campus, in other words, what happens in the institutions where we work. The curriculum, what we deliver and whether sustainable development is effectively built into that. And finally, a community to look at what we're doing and what we should be doing in terms of developing alliances with other organisations where we work to really make sure that this message is driven home.
We've been working to green the education sector since about 2003. Many of you will have People and Planet groups at your colleges and universities. 25% of the UK's public sector carbon emissions are actually coming from the higher education sector, a quarter, and that's taking into account all the emissions produced through staff and student commuting, international travel, energy usage, the £8 billion a year spent on goods and services and where those come from, and the embedded kind of carbon emissions in those, as well as the waste. Between 2005 and this year, there's been a 25% increase in carbon emissions from the sector. And what the science says is needed is within the next 10 years, a halving of higher education sector emissions from 2005 levels. One of the student groups that we work with up at the University of Edinburgh have done a study which looks at actually where does the carbon come from, and 15% was attributable to the campus itself, whereas 85% was actually attributable to community behaviour, something which is going to be absolutely key in meeting the targets that have been set for the sector is creating behaviour change. The community needs to shape and develop and implement its own response to meeting the challenges of climate change. We focus in particular on four key areas. Travel, 40% of university emissions are actually attributable to things like staff and student commuting and flying. Sustainable local food, another really big issue. The biggest thing that we can all do personally to reduce our carbon footprints is actually eating less meat and dairy. And then there's a number of other projects around waste and improving recycling facilities. And then finally, around energy, the age of fossil fuels is over, and universities really could and should be leading the way in terms of the research to develop new technologies, but also in terms of their own consumption of energy. Universities have come a long way over the last few years in terms of policy improvements. They've all got carbon reduction plans, but actually that's not having the desired impact. And that's why our campaign is very much about generating and empowering kind of grassroots action.
John Foster from the University of Lancaster has made a very telling contribution to how we think about learning and sustainability. He says that sustainable development doesn't just depend on learning, rather it's inherently a learning process. It's a process of making the emergent future ecologically sound and humanly habitable as it emerges. A crucial point, I think, about effective learning is that it's not only got tangible and useful outcomes in the short term, but it also reinforces motivation for and the capability for further learning. Up to about age 16, compulsory schooling, if you like, we need to get across a general and probably rather diffuse set of understandings about sustainability, but also, crucially, a sense of concern for considering those issues. The prime function here is the starting of the development of critical thinking, dialogue, debate, social participation. Undergraduate courses tend to be specialist, they tend to be discipline specific rather than the broad citizenly focus that you find in schools. Where we've got the nature of work changing, the nature of what it is to be a competent professional is also changing. It's this external pull from the society which can stimulate quite a bit of curriculum change. And that's in contrast to the interests of academics and students. They constitute a push from within the institution itself. And there is a dynamic here between these push and pull forces, which I think people interested in change just have to seize that dynamic and use it. Little of that is likely to be directed by senior managers within institutions, as it is in schools. It really is down to academics and students and the allies that they bring. In principle, that analysis applies to further education as well. And I think that's particularly so in relation to the growing significance of sustainability issues in the workplace. And I think it follows from all that that we cannot in any sense teach instrumentally for sustainable development because at a very basic level the precise requirements of what that is going to need are unknown, and they depend on a range of factors, one of which is actually the influence of the research-informed higher education curriculum itself. One model of the social role of education is in accord with Amartya Sen's account of rational behaviour as the continuing development of preferences over what preferences to have, and his notion of development as the capability, the substantive freedoms to live a life that one has reason to value. And it seems to me that the whole of the formal education system should be promoting that rationality and that freedom, because those qualities are firmly associated with tolerance for a plurality of values, and we need that if we're going to have open-minded social engagement with these absolutely vital issues.
80% of emissions are as a result of local activity, things like how we heat and power our homes and workplaces and how we travel about. It's also clear that one of the most efficient ways of cutting carbon in terms of doing it cost effectively is to do it in a locally coordinated way. You get much sort of more cost-effective house retrofit if you do it on a street-by-street basis. There are some things like using our heat more efficiently that can only be done on a geographical basis if you do heat mapping and you work out what buildings are, you know, responsible for generating heat and where it could be more usefully used. And things like local transport obviously can only be coordinated locally. But also, it's really important for social justice, because it's right, I think, as was said in the previous session, that green measures are not just imposed on people, but people have a say in the low-carbon future of their own economies, what green measures should be implemented locally. Unfortunately, the coalition government is making it a lot harder for this level of action to happen. It's so far either torn up or has made clear its intention to tear up basically all of the regional and local government structures that are in place at the moment that drive what kind of inadequate action there already is. In addition to that, the austerity cuts are hitting councils not only disproportionately but also front-loaded, so the cuts are happening earlier in local government than a lot of the rest of the public sector, which makes it quite difficult for even the best councils that are really trying to take a lead on this agenda to, you know, turn around and respond to that really rapidly. Councils around the country are working with Friends of the Earth to call for a nationwide system of local carbon budgets, and that's the idea that there would be sort of a cap of carbon emissions across each local area. It will mean every local authority will be consulting with local people, so every local people have a right to a kind of a say in kind of what the plans are, the engagement with businesses, but also, you know, very crucially, the institutions that you represent and work in. And it will mean that all of that can be worked up into a strategy and a plan to carry out the emissions cuts across the area. So I think there's a clear role for colleges and universities in this. A just transition needs to be a planned transition. Campuses, buildings, transport, heat and energy, all of these things are only efficiently tackled if it's done in a coordinated way. What we're trying to do is, you know, this thing about changing politics to change the world is about mainstreaming and making it part of the structures of how our society works, so that we don't all have to, you know, make every single individual choice on our own, that the structures of society make it easier for this absolutely fast transition in behavioural change to be delivered, so that we secure this low carbon future that we're all very much committed to.